My name is Nick DeLucia. I'm running for the 139th District in Norwich Town, Greenville, Taffville, parts of Montville, and all of Basra.
And you are a Norwich native?
I'm a Norwich native. I was born and raised in Norwich, downtown on McKinley Ave. Attended the Norwich Public School System, went to NFA. I'm the youngest of 5 boys, so I have 4 older brothers that all went to NFA, and actually just Friday, my second oldest brother was inducted into NFA Sports Hall of Fame. So my father came up from Florida where he retired to, and it was nice to have all my brothers around and spend some time with them. So
Very nice.
yeah, we have a long history in Norwich. So
Very good.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what you did after NFA?
yeah, so I graduated in 2003. I joined the Marine Corps. For me, I was in 11th grade history class, coming out of gym class going to history, and sat there and watched the second plane hit the tower, 9/11. I was a journalism student, so a friend of mine who was a senior and I was a junior, we were doing video on enlistment and recruitment after 9/11. And we did all the vigils around the area, and I got to meet a lot of all the recruiters, the Air Force down here in New London, Marine Corps, Army, the Navy down this way, and I sat with them afterwards, and then I ended up joining the Marine Corps. So spent 4 years in the Marine Corps. I got out in 2007. I moved. My folks retired down to Florida, so instead of coming back to Norwich, my brother I was closest to lived down in North Branford. So I stayed on his couch for a week, and waiting for an apartment to get ready. And I had a job lined up right out of the service. And from there, I met my wife and got active in my community with a lot of veterans programs. Friends of mine that I met while I was down there that I met through college classes that were fellow veterans using the GI Bill decided they were going to run for office. So I didn't know really anything about it. I took some political science classes, said I'd help out, wave signs, knock on doors, canvass with flyering for them, and I enjoyed it. I really, I liked it. I liked hearing everybody tell their different stories, their backgrounds of where they were from and how they were struggling, because this was just after the recession hit. So it was big. I mean, it impacted all of Connecticut, where we see here in southeastern Connecticut it really impacted, but it impacted all of Connecticut. From there, a couple years later, I met my wife, had a daughter. A friend of mine approached me about running for the representative town membership in Branford. So I ran, won, and I sat on the RTM there for over a year before my job with AT&T promoted me up here to New London to a manager in the company-owned retail store. So my wife got sick of me driving back and forth. So we figured if we were going to buy a house out this way, we'd go home. Norwich is home, and we'd buy a house back in Norwich. And we've been there a little over 2 years now, and we love it. My daughter's now going through the same school system that I went through. So it's nice to be able to take her to places like Mohegan Park and remember the experiences I had there as a kid, and that now she can create her own new experiences with her friends. So
When you moved back to Norwich, you started to get politically active pretty much right away. Do you want to talk about that?
I guess
What was
I
that
guess
like?
I guess I did. I mean, I didn't think at the time it was being political. I mean, I had a lot of friends that I served with in the Marine Corps that, you ask any veteran, they'll tell you they have guys they served with that was it for them. The military was the only thing they knew how to do. It was the only thing they had in their life. So I was very fortunate that when I was injured and I got out, I had a great support network. I had family, I had friends that I grew up with that were there for me to make sure, just call me up, say, hey, you okay? You going in for another surgery? What's going on? Stuff like that, where I had friends that didn't have that. So for me, seeing what was going on from the VA's perspective, I started to get active with veteran groups because I felt that, here are guys that raised their right hand to volunteer.
Here in Norwich, you were active with them?
This was down in the New Haven area, down in Branford and East Haven. I had a friend of mine who was a golf pro at a golf course, and he came to me and said, hey, let's put on a golf tournament for veterans. I said, okay. Didn't know how to do it, so I started reaching out. I had a friend that I served with that ended up going and working for the Wounded Warrior Project. So I called him up and said, hey, what do we do if we want to put in a tournament or something, or some kind of charity thing for the Wounded Warrior? He put me in touch with who I needed to, and we did that. And then from there, that's how I started to meet a lot of people. And I had a professor from one of the college that was the mayor of the town that I was living in East Haven. And it was fun. She was Democrat, was a Republican, but she was nice. And I got along with her. And that she kind of pushed me a little bit towards politics. And I just I'm not, more of a behind the scenes kind of person. I like helping out and doing that stuff. I thought that was fun. But that, like I said, I was approached by a friend of mine to get involved and run. And I said, okay.
Well, when you moved here to Norwich, you
So,
got involved with the Republican.
Yeah, so I was, I'm fiscal conservative. So I am, I have the independent endorsement. I'm socially independent. I'm fiscally conservative. I believe in helping people, giving them a helping hand up. And I've found out over the time of living in areas that you have a low income areas, that individuals don't want to be just given everything. They want to be able to provide more and move up and for their families. And I saw that, and I felt as though some of these people don't have that ability, that there's nothing out there for them. They're not retraining them how to do something. They're just giving them a check. So it was, how do you fix that? And that's, when I decided to really start getting involved and helping out. But when I moved back here to Norwich, it was my father was friends with a couple people on the Republican Town Committee. So I figured, okay, well, I'm resigning from my elected position in Brantford. Well, at least I can do out in Norwich is help out, is go to the meetings, meet some of the folks, and be active. So
That's how you kind of got your foot in the door with this. So we gotta ask.
Yeah.
We have to go through the standard questions.
Yes.
And you can, diverge any way you want to without. But you've had some very specific experiences in the last few years since you came back. First to Brantford and East Haven and then up here. So you probably have some ideas on what steps you think the state has to take to restore fiscal stability and stop the deficits that it's facing.
So Connecticut's in a tough position right now. I mean, we're staring down at a possible $4.6 billion deficit next year. This is out of control. And I've always said is that, we've always been labeled as one of the wealthiest states in the country. We don't have a revenue issue in Connecticut. We have a spending problem. And we continue to spend, and then what we do is we raise taxes, raise fees, come up with new ideas of how we're going to bring more revenue in. And that's the wrong way to go about it, because I can't, and nobody else in our state can do that in their household. They can't say, well, I make $3,000, I'm gonna spend $5,000 this month. Let me just go to my boss and say, give me more money. It doesn't work. I mean, I wish it did, but it doesn't work. And we need to really take a hard look at our budget and what we're spending our money on. And I didn't realize, you would hear everything from people. It used to be the joke about teachers where, they'd spend the money and buy extra things they didn't need because they would get less the following year, which you're seeing a lot of teachers are coming out of pocket to provide just basic pens, pencils, papers, books, supplies for their classrooms. So when I started looking into this and seeing in Norwich and Montville what's going on with the education cost sharing, well, we're spending so much money in Connecticut that now fundamental things that we should be providing, we're not providing. We're not providing adequate funding for our education system. We're putting it solely on the towns with a lot of these unfunded mandates or underfunded mandates and telling them, come up with the money. And on the back of that, you have the minimum budget requirement. So that basically says that whatever you spent last year, you have to spend $1 more next year. Well, if the state like we saw this past year with Dan Malloy holding back money to the municipalities, they have to come up with not only the money they lost from the state, but also putting more money in on top of it. And how do they do that? Towns don't sell any tangible good. They're not holding bake sales or doing tire rotations. They have to raise taxes. They're raising property taxes. So we're seeing taxes going up across our state, whether the legislature is raising an income tax or they're holding back money, and the municipality is raising the mill rate. That's a direct result as to what's going on in Hartford. And I agree with the gubernatorial candidate Republican side, Bob Stefanowski, on the fact that we need to start at a zero balanced budget, look at it line by line, and bring the individual departments in and say, what exactly do you need? some of these things don't, we need to find out, what do you absolutely have to get the job done? No overages. Every department's going to have to take a little bit of a hit because of we need to pay off the deficit. We need to pay our debt. What it comes down to is we have to fulfill our obligations that we've set forth to our communities and our towns, and we have to pay off the debt.
Do you think the minimum budget requirement is a mistake? Would you try to get
I
rid of
do.
it?
I do think it's. I understood the originality of like why they originally brought it forward. Now it's a problem because you have a lot of mandates coming out from the federal government for special needs, which I was very naive to autism and special needs until I met my wife. She's a behavioral therapist for autistic children, and in Norwich, seeing that and same thing going on in all these other towns, if you have a child come in and say the cost is $200,000 a year for their education because they're special needs, if they leave your town because of the minimum budget requirement, you cannot take that $200,000 out of your budget for education. These are things that can completely decimate a smaller town's budget. And you see things, and the problem is, if you look at it, what is always the first thing to go? It's sports, it's art, it's music. We know now that these are huge impacts on developmental for children. So we need these things. You have towns that don't offer foreign languages, and then once they get to high school, they're behind the eight ball because they can't afford it because of the fact that there's all these mandates coming down from the state that says this is how you have to spend the money. However, we are not going to contribute to you spending that money. Or they promise you, well, we're going to give you this amount. Even right now, the education cost sharing is underfunded. So it's a catch-22 if we want to help out the towns, but we're not doing it. So it sounds great. Sound bites are awesome. Well, we're restoring municipal aid to towns, to education, but it's not fully restored.
You mentioned Mr. Stefanowski. He has said he intends to work with the legislature to gradually reduce and ultimately eliminate the income tax. Do you consider that a realistic and worthwhile goal?
Now, within the first 2 or 4 or 6 years, I think that it's almost 50% of our budget. It's a huge percentage of the backbone of our budget. I think it needs to start with going through the budget, and I agree with what he says. I think it's going to be extremely easy for this next session for these legislators and this governor to find 5% of waste and abuse in this budget. I mean, every time you open up your guys' paper or we turn on the TV, we're hearing more and more about wasteful spending coming down from, either UConn or other taxpayer-funded entities and departments within our state. I think it's a nice goal to achieve. It's one of those things. You aim for the moon. If you miss, you land among the stars, right? We aim for 100% reduction in the income tax. What if we get 30%? I mean, that's something that you think about what the savings is going to be on the taxpayer, how much money they're going to have in their pocket that they can reinvest into our community and into our state. So I think that for it to be completely dismissed as a pipe dream and it'll never happen, I think is kind of wrong because we do spend a lot of money in this state. And what do we really have to show for it?
Along that line, the Democrat in the office right now wants the legislature to phase in a $15 minimum wage. Would you support such legislation?
So, 50. I agree with a livable wage. I don't agree with the state mandating how much a business has to pay. You look at cost of living and what the market will allow. So that pretty much for me determines what the value is on an individual's wage. It's market driven. You put a business and a mom and pop and tell them now you have to pay $15 an hour minimum wage on top of the health care and the individual mandates for that, they're going to go out of business. They're not going to employ as many people. They're going to start, part-time employees so they can offset the cost, or they're going to raise the cost of whatever they're selling. So I think we need to look at that and allow for, and it's working. I mean, we need to allow the business to decide. Amazon, everybody can say, oh, they were pressured. Federal government isn't jumping up to $15. Amazon decided to go to $15. McDonald's is looking at $15. As these companies start to do that, other companies will follow suit, and they'll see livable wages, what it is in certain areas. I know from jobs I've had in the past, there's market increases. So as cost of living goes up, my employer looks at that and they give a market increase to say, yep, this is how much it costs to live here. You're being underpaid. We're going to raise that. That's something a business decided to do. And it shouldn't be something that the government mandates and puts out there and says, you have to do this or else. Because the or else is the business leaves. And we've seen that time and time again in the state of Connecticut. Businesses leave.
Well, I'll stick to the script here for a second. Job growth in Connecticut has lagged behind other states.
Absolutely.
And I know this is one of your themes. What can the legislature do to encourage job growth?
We need to really look at a honest taxing of businesses. We need to have some incentives to bring the businesses back to Connecticut. We did have a surplus here in businesses for the longest time. You had down in Stamford and the Greenwich area with these movie and TV studios where they all wanted to come in Connecticut because they were getting, tax abatements for being here. Well, those expired. They weren't renewed, and they up and left. We need to start looking at how we bring the businesses here and how do we keep them here, not doing deals where we give them a tax deal for the next 15 to 30 years, but then there's a loop in the clause where they can just up and leave at any point in time and have to just pay a fee or a fine to us. We need to actually keep them here. We want to bring businesses back to Connecticut. We need Connecticut to be business friendly. I mean, you look at southeastern Connecticut, this used to be with mills and plants and factories. This was, the epicenter of where everything was produced. And now it's, drive around southeastern Connecticut, you see empty factories.
So you would bring manufacturing, you'd encourage manufacturing to come back?
I would encourage any business that wants to come to Connecticut to come to Connecticut. I don't see any reason that, these technology companies wouldn't come here other than the fact that we get pretty cold here in Connecticut, but you see it all the time. We see Hallmark coming in to shoot movies. Mm-hmm. We have another movie that's going to be shot based off of a Wally Lamb book here in Norwich. So we see they're coming out here. Well, what can we do as a studio? Bring a studio here. Put a studio here and let's, so now you can all year round.
So you would bring them here by a change in the tax laws rather than an incentive, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I would change the tax laws. The incentives are great, but they're not sustainable because once it expires, the taxes jump so high on them that that little bit of profit that they were reinvesting, they lose. It needs to be something that gradually increases and not drastically.
So what tax laws would you change? Would you change the balance of property tax or what would you do?
Well, you want the property tax. The property taxes will help the municipalities out too. Mm-hmm. However, what I would change is the fact that they will, the towns will give them that adjustment on the property taxes. The towns go in and say, yep, this is where you're going to get this abatement where you're not going to pay as much in property taxes for the next 15 years while you build your business and you get yourself to a sustainable position. That's something that the municipalities, and I think that the state needs to stay out of that and allow the municipalities to do that. What needs to change is the fact that we're not very business friendly. So by mandating with healthcare provisions, or we talk about $15 minimum wage, these are things that businesses look at as far as, well, what's our workforce? How can people get here? Can we afford to pay this number of people here where we would have to pay this amount to get them in Alabama or Kentucky? These are, it's a business by business. The other thing is if you have a business there where the majority of their individuals are on the roads, we need to look at, how do we fix our roads and highways to make it possible for employees to get to their employer in a timely fashion.
I'm glad you asked that, because the next question is, should the state install electronic tolls on its highways as a way of raising the revenue necessary to support its transportation needs?
No.
No. Okay.
No.
How would you raise the revenue?
Raise the revenue for the transportation? Well, first off, I'd start by getting rid of some of our special transportation projects that are in the deficit. They're in the negative. So you look at the CT Fast Track going from New Britain to Hartford. It's $40-something million a year to cost, and it generates about $14 million in revenue. That's, it's solely funded by taxpayers. It's you're looking at something that could be 75 to 80% subsidized by taxpayers. Shoreline East going, same thing. It's, you get 1,100 people a day using it, where, it'll be cheaper for us to let them put those cars back on the road and save the money. So there's certain things we need to look at our special transportation fund that's been underfunded for a decade now, but they want to do special projects, and we need to put this in. Let's do this special transportation bus route and do this train route. And if they're not successful, a business can't run that way. So if we can't run a business in a deficit, why are we allowing our departments to do the same thing? The state is a big business, but we help people with it. And then, on the other side. So how do we run a portion of our business in our state that's helping individuals with public transportation, but doesn't generate revenue, but doesn't even break even? Costs us more money than...
I'm not sure that we're talking about the same thing. In other words, transit projects are usually run by some form of government. Sometimes it's a special authority or whatever.
Absolutely.
And they don't seem to be able to run on ticket prices only.
No.
In our neighboring states. So our neighboring states have gone to tolls in a lot of cases.
The problem with tolls is that it's going to cost we're not going to toll just the truck drivers.
Okay.
Rhode Island's being sued for that. We're going to, what do we put tolls in, lawsuit ends, okay, it's illegal, you can't toll just truck drivers. Well, now we have the gantries up. So what's going to happen is we've seen historically in our state, well, we're going to pass this on to everybody. And now everybody's hitting it. And, we've doing this now from March until now, and having friends all over the state and hearing, no, they're only going to put tolls in 95 down by Fairfield. We have the biggest casino in the Western Hemisphere. We have a second largest generated casino almost in the country. We'd be naive to think they're not going to toll everybody coming from out of state into these casinos here in southeastern Connecticut. That's going to negatively impact the residents that live here. And the problem with tolls is that we're looking at on the ballot here in November a lockbox for tolls. I don't believe there's a such thing as a lockbox. I think any way that they can find to pull money out of it, to put it in the general fund and fund something else, we've seen will happen. Historically, we've seen that happen in our state. We look at the Connecticut lottery, where that money was earmarked for education. We're seeing it now with the casinos, with the Mashantucket and the Pequot Fund. It goes into the general fund, and the way it's dispersed is completely uneven based on the impact it has, especially here in our communities. We do not see adequate funding for the crime, the drug, the addiction use, increased traffic, wear and tear on our road. We don't see any of resources for that based off of that fund because of how it's broken down. So I don't think that throwing tolls out there and saying, well, let's put tolls up, it's going to generate more revenue, that's the answer.
Although if you were in the legislature, you could decide not to ignore the lockbox, but that's a future question.
No, absolutely. Well, hopefully you can ask me that question 2 years from now.
All right. We don't have too much more time. So would you support a bill legalizing marijuana possession and use for adults 21 and older?
You know what? Honestly, I didn't support medicinal. As it came out, and I talked to friends that I served with that suffer from PTSD and injuries, I've seen the real need for it. And as I've gotten more information on it, I see that, wow, this is a great alternative, especially what's going on now with opioids. And we have a huge epidemic here in Connecticut, which is a huge problem. As far as recreational marijuana, my concerns are how do we test for it at traffic violations, traffic stops? How do they determine, they can do a breathalyzer for alcohol? How do you decide that I go in now to the gas station and my daughter loves to go up to the counter and grab one of what is it? They're not the Cosmo brownies. They're saran wrapped. Some local company, local small business made them and they sell them there. How do we determine which one's a pot brownie, which one's not? So we'll put a sticker on it. Everything's got what the ingredients are nowadays. But what's to stop a little kid from grabbing that and the parents in a rush doesn't see it? You saw that down in Hamden where a child brought pot brownies into school and the number of kids that got sick and fell ill and had to get brought over to Yale. So these are the things I look at is it can't just be a revenue source. We can't just look at passing things because we want money. We want to do all these special projects. So how do we fund it? Well, let's do this. Let's do that. Let's legalize this. I think we need to study it more. And I've heard, the debates on the other side with, well, why do we have to study it? Let's just call our neighbors that legalized it and see what's going on. Well, that's okay. You can do that. But how do we adjust? How do we look at making sure that our children are safe still and we're getting some kind of revenue off this? We can't just tax our way out of the problem. We have a massive deficit in our state that's growing every day, every year. We spend way more than we bring in. We have a budget that's balanced on 100% of projected revenue, which is absurd. Nobody does that in their household. You always want to put money aside. So the fact that we do that, and these are the things that come up is, let's pass recreational marijuana, let's put tolls in. I don't think that's the solution to the problems. I think there's a lot more to recreational marijuana. I think we really need to see the effects of, how do we, like I said, we pull somebody over. How do you know somebody's impaired? How do you test for that? Because I'm pretty sure that neither the person sitting on the side of the road getting pulled over and the trooper or the local police officer wants to wait, a day or two for that urinalysis to come back. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things is, safety needs to be a number one priority.
Okay. Any more questions?
We're looking at how nonprofits and non-taxable companies have been kind of affecting the tax base in Norwich as of late. We know that the tax assessor in Norwich kind of went through to look at those, like the hospitals or DCF and what to do about that. Do you have an opinion on that?
From my understanding, I was looking at the nonprofits being taxed. They didn't put their paperwork in on time. So pilot programs, I feel as though don't work. Coming from the state with the hospitals and you're getting the payment in lieu of tax is what a pilot program is. Mm-hmm. It's not working. It's drastically underfunded. The state's not honoring their obligation. Mm-hmm. Once again, this is how this state, and this is why I'm running this individual that spent 26 years in this seat. And for 26 years, he's voted everything party lines now for the past decade. And it's, well, what are you doing for the district? Why are these municipalities struggling? Why is the state not honoring their agreement? You're not there to support your party. You're there to be the voice of the voters in the district that elected you to represent them. So why is it not down there fighting? When education costs and the cost sharing was held back from the governor to Montville and to Norwich, why wasn't he up there on the Capitol steps, everybody else fighting to get the money back? Mm-hmm. Why are we seeing this, the pilot programs in the city of Norwich? Why are we getting less money for the payments than we were told we were supposed to get? These are the questions that I think the voters need to ask Representative Ryan and say, where are you on this? Why does your record the past 8 years, you vote 99% with Daniel Malloy? Why are you not voting for things that'll help the 139th, that'll help our towns?
We need to wrap up, but if you want to spend a little more time talking about why you are running, that would be fine.
And I'm running because I was born and raised in Norwich. I decided to come home. I could have stayed, down on the shoreline. I could have gone anywhere I wanted when I finished up my time in the service. Norwich is home. I was raised there. My father and my mother raised my brothers and I there. My father was very community organized. He loved going to events. He took us to everything. I think I missed 2 Taste of Italy's in Norwich due to the fact that I was in a service. Other than that, I've been to every event. I love the community. And for me to come home and to see what's going on and start going to council meetings and see how they were getting slammed in what the tax base is at and where the mill rate is insane. And, you know, how do you bring businesses to a city like Norwich when you have a mill rate in downtown that, you know, was projected originally before they actually passed the budget with the increases that they certain people wanted was going to be over 50 mil. You would never see a business there. The fact that they were able to bring that down and not have to raise the mill rate is amazing, that they found a way to do that. But it starts with the state. We never recovered in southeastern Connecticut from this recession. We're talking about 80 residents a day leaving our state. Businesses are fleeing our state. And look at it as, where's our representative in this? After 26 years, if you're sitting there with the title of deputy speaker, if you do not have the relationships in the House to go to these people and say, listen, I know that this is the deal on the Mashantucket Fund. We need a little bit more down here to work, you know, across the aisle, you know, not pulling the party line, and to say, listen, I know you're a Republican and I'm a Democrat. It doesn't matter. Let's get this together and do what's right for for this district, for these towns, and to see that those things are not happening. That it's for me. I'm not subscribed to party lines. Like I said, I'm fiscally conservative. I went out and achieved something that nobody in this district no Republican has done before. I petitioned for the independent line. I got the money to qualify for the grant by going out and talking to the voters, whether they're Republican, Democrat, independent, or unaffiliated, or they're libertarian. For me, it doesn't matter. I want to represent the individuals in Norwich, Montville, and Boston. I want to represent this district. That's why I take a hard line on New Haven and Bridgeport and Hartford, because I'm not running to represent them. They have their own representatives, and their representatives do a pretty good job if you look at the fact Hartford's getting a bailout, which I disagree with, because they won't do that to our small towns. And that's why I'm running. I want to bring honest leadership here to the district and allow people's voice to be heard again in Hartford.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.